But in talking to Cece before the film, I had offered to introduce her, and she said, well, I'll just introduce myself. So if you'd like to do that, go right ahead.
Well, I'm not a filmmaker by trade, so you can obviously see that. Everybody in my film got makeup artists but me, and somebody to tell them what to wear and what not to wear. But I started out in journalism, and I was in communications, similar to yourself, and did mostly tourism, and that was my background. And I had an idea when my grandfather passed away to do something, but I wasn't sure whether it would be a book or I wasn't quite sure. It didn't manifest itself to me, and I kind of had an idea conceptually that maybe a feature film. I had seen that great movie Path to War. I don't know if you guys have seen that about the LBJ and the administration and spiraling into Vietnam, and so that was kind of the impetus to want to do a film. And so I thought, of course, HBO, their film department, would go, oh yeah, Goldwater, yeah. And of course, that wasn't the enthusiasm I got at all. So my background's not filmmaking, so I always feel honored to be at festivals because everybody here has got more talent than I have in anything. I just happen to be born into a really, really cool guy's family. So.
Okay. Well, when I begin to question you, I was thinking there's a great temptation in this room to talk politics because, as most people in the audience know, there are an awful lot of speakers that come here. We talk politics, and at least with a couple of my questions before we open it up to the audience, I kind of want to talk more about the filmmaking process, since this is the film festival. And I'm just very curious about the difficulties inherent in doing a film about a family member, especially one that deals not only with some of the difficult personal issues that some of your uncles talked about, and your mother, but also there's some very sensitive political subjects, and your grandfather did have his critics, and I wonder, what was that experience like going through that? How difficult was it for you?
I didn't really have an agenda when I started the film. My agenda was pretty clear. It was just tell the story, good, bad, and different. Make sure that I didn't leave anything out so that I'd be chastised later, like, oh, well, why didn't you add that civil rights thing? So I didn't really have that motivation of an agenda going into it. It was very challenging to separate myself from a personal side, to be a filmmaker, to not wanting to break down and cry with my mom, or get my uncle to come to the level where he can actually discuss personal things about his life. And I think those were the challenging times, is how you take that hat and you take it off and you put it back on. And the director that I had was remarkable, and Julie Anderson, did so much to just give me that guidance and tell me how to do this and not mess it up and make it really authentic.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest surprise that you learned about your grandfather that you didn't know before you set out to do this?
I think there wasn't so much of surprise as it was affirmation. I always thought of him as being this, stoic, larger-than-life character, a man that, you never said no to. You just jumped up and did it. And I didn't realize that other people kind of felt the same way I did. And they all had an admiration for him, different levels of admiration. You obviously see whether it's political or emotional or somebody's, it's a family relation. But it wasn't something that there wasn't one thing that just was, stood out. I knew every issue, but I didn't really know the particulars of how he really had to battle it, and really fought a lot of people that didn't really believe in him. And I think that was what I got out of doing this film.
So would you say that you respected him more after having done this?
I without a doubt, I have more respect for him after doing this film. And also, I think it goes above and beyond respect. It's kind of it's an installation of your own personal growth and saying, you know what, this man was so amazing. If I can show this film, or if people can see that somebody like this tried from, uneducated, all these things that Barry was, he went to 1 year of college, that he was able to make a difference. That, to me, is great. And I'm proud of it.
Well, one thing also that struck me watching this film, and I have to say, I watched it with a friend of mine who's an extraordinary liberal who I think was prepared to hate him before the movie started, and she fell in love with him. And he comes across as an extremely likable person, and I'm a political junkie, and I learned a lot of things about him that I didn't know, and came away with a much more admiration for him. And I wonder, this is more of an abstract question, but I mean, as you watch the political coverage of the presidential campaign this time, or really at any point, do you feel like that we're missing some crucial essence of these people who are running for office because it doesn't come across in the political process, because they're, demonized on the one hand and idolized on the other hand, and the actual person doesn't come across?
I was raised a long time ago not to talk about politics. It's a really painful sword to fall on. So, I don't know. I think it's hard to be in this time right now where we're all in such flux, and there's so much indecision, and there's so much indecisiveness in terms of our process of who's the best person. But I think that what becomes apparent, especially with this film, and what my grandfather was probably trying to say, is that our civil liberties are so important, and our Constitution is what we adhere to, and we should adhere to as a country. And I think that's politically the only thing I can say, is that I think that is a document that we should all subscribe to, and we should all take note of, and realize that when we're talking about civil liberties, things are being taken away from us constantly, and that's probably the only little tidbit of political stuff I can really talk about.
Well, the last question I'll have before I open it up here, you had told me kind of off stage, so to speak, that you've come to know the granddaughters of some of the other major figures at the time, Lyndon Johnson's granddaughter, and who else did you mention?
Well, I became friends with Johnson's granddaughter, Catherine Robb, and that was just serendipitous, because I was at South by Southwest, and then I met her, and we had dinner, and then I became friends with Ingrid Rockefeller, who's Nelson's granddaughter. So we have a kind of a little collective group that we have this picture of us.
But you said kind of that you felt that it was interesting that you all shared something, and I guess you never really got to. I
think what I was trying to say to you is that I met all these individuals, and I would never have thought that they were great women and fantastic. And you kind of take somebody else's personality and you say, that person's not going to be nice, and that person's not going to be fun to hang around with. And these women are magnificent women and very accomplished and wonderful. And that was probably what I got from that.
Okay. Well, with that, I think it's your opportunity to ask questions of C.C. Goldwater. There's a microphone there, sorry.
How well did Barry Goldwater know John McCain, and did he play any kind of role in McCain's career?
He knew John McCain. He knew John McCain very well. When John moved to the state, he was friends of Cindy's family, and they were old Arizona family, and so I think he set some really high standards for John, and I think that it's big boots to step into. But there was no doubt when my grandfather was ready to leave, Senator McCain was ready to just take over. And that was, I think that from influence standpoint, I think that Barry was very much of a mentor to him in a lot of ways. And there was one incident that was actually just described recently in a book that my uncle and John Dean released called Pure Goldwater, and it's actual letters. You saw some of the letters, but my grandfather was really an amazing writer. He wrote a lot, and that was the way he communicated with his kids. The communication stuff was not necessarily verbal all the time, but it was it was the written word. And he wrote a very long document about how Senator McCain was doing a fundraiser that was a tribute to my grandfather, and he had explained to my grandfather that was a fundraiser for the political party, and it really wasn't. The monies were going to go to his re-election campaign. So in this letter, my grandfather just lambasted it and set him straight. But it really was interesting because it really did kind of startle Senator McCain in the sense of how he was, covertly doing something. And he came out and said, no, I'm sorry, that's, you're right, that was, the agenda there was wrong. And so I think, you live and learn. Who knows if you learn, but you live.
Okay. Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. In the background of the room where some of, I think, the family members are interviewed, there's this great portrait of the gentleman with the sunglasses and the hat on, which I assume to be Barry Goldwater.
Right.
Please tell us the story of that portrait.
Oh, God. That's what happens when you're a filmmaker and you don't have a huge budget. Your house becomes the set for everything. Every single shot is in my house. It's just, I've moved the furniture around different places. So like the bed's moved out and you're in the living room and, in your bedroom, and my mother's in my dining room and somebody's in my kitchen, my brother's out near my fountain. It really was amazing. It was cheap, too. That painting was a gift from the Goldwater department store when my grandfather turned 86. No, I'm sorry, he turned 76. And it was a painting that was done by an artist named John Nieto, who's out of Santa Fe. And presented it to my grandfather. We're all standing there, and my grandfather looks at it and, smiles. All the pictures get taken. I'm standing next to him, and he goes, you want it? You got it. So that ended up on my wall, and I've had it since then. So I was pretty lucky.
There's a question back there.
Well, first I ought to mention I just cleared out my parents' house last year, and one thing that was there was a can that said Goldwater, the drink for the conservative taste, and that was from that election back then. But I'm wondering if, in hearing your family talk, did any of them ever think he could win that 64 race?
I think without a doubt he knew from the get-go his opponent was unbeatable. I don't think he thought that I think George Will explains it, that they weren't going to have 3 presidents in 1 year. It just wasn't going to happen. So I think that it frightened him because he had actually decided to run, and that's when he made that commitment and that conversation with Kennedy about, let's do this kind of, Lincoln Douglas kind of thing, and we'll go out and we'll really hit the road and we'll show what campaigning's all about. And then when Kennedy was assassinated, my grandfather wanted to pull out of the campaign. He actually went to the draft Goldwater, which were the Henry Cabot Lodge and the various big mucky-mucks that were running him, and said, I'm not going to win, and I don't want to be the fall guy. And they just said, you're doing it. And if you don't like it, you're not going to be in Washington. And so it gives you a kind of a depth of what people do for their country. And besides fighting and being over in World War II and flying planes and doing things, he was willing to go and be put on a stake during the '64 campaign, and it was pretty grueling for him. I mean, you saw how tough they were. And we look at politics now, and you can't help but think that we still are tough. It's just that you see the little ads that Barry had. I mean, how amateurish is that? I mean, you look at the ads now, and they're just millions of dollars. It was a very tough. I think it was a very tough election for him emotionally, and it did take a toll. But he persevered, and he really loved Washington, so that's why he went back to be a senator.
Did you have a question?
I thought there were some remarkably intimate moments in this film with your family and with several of the people that were interviewed. And I was just curious, is there a certain process or technique that you use on a regular basis in order to make people comfortable enough to speak with you the intimate way that they did during this movie?
Well, I can't tell you that. You'll have to tell me everything about yourself first. I don't know. I think that dealing with your family is really dynamic. My family is wacky, so it's totally, it was like the Griswolds. I mean, we were just so, the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing half the time in terms of just making sure we got the right information. But we got so much. We shot hours and hours and hours of footage. So this is obviously edited down. But I think my approach to the family stuff was from the get-go, I went at them and wrote them letters and correspondence when I was, in my first interviews and meeting with Showtime and meeting with HBO. And I was really, I was just all over it. I wanted to make sure that they knew that I wasn't going to do something that was just caustic and awful, and I wasn't going to go out and disgrace them. So it was really important for me to let them know. So I corresponded constantly with them, and I let them see parts of the film before it was done. So I'd go in and show my mom a little segment of what she did, and make her feel good that she looked great on TV and everything. But that was all part of the process, and I think some filmmakers, if you don't have that family side to it, you're not going to go and you don't care. You're not going to go show them a cut of it and say, well, did you like your makeup, Mom? Well, Mom, we can redo it. So I think that the dynamics of doing a portrait on your family is very emotional, and it was an interesting, wonderful journey for me, but it was emotional. It did affect me, and it still affects me when I see this. This film was done in 2006, so I mean, and luckily HBO airs it occasionally, so we all get to sit around and look at ourselves on TV and cry, but it still affects me. I still look at it, and it still just makes me feel really warm inside.
One thing that I thought was unique also about, you're doing a documentary about a political figure, but I thought that his, photography was extraordinary, and it also was pretty remarkable that he had done so much filmmaking himself. And I was wondering, from a technical standpoint, some of those films, if he was filming his own children, that must have been sort of, I guess, in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and so how did you go about finding that film? What kind of state was it in? How did you get it onto?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, my grandfather was such a videographer. He really loved filming, and he always have two cameras, a color, black and white. He'd have his movie camera. He was an amazing. There was so much information, and so when I went to my Uncle Mike and said, "What do you got?" he said, "Okay." And he handed me like 45 cans. And we're talking about, some of the cans are film footage that it's not relative. I mean, it was just B-roll of just a cactus and the flower and the little bird going. I mean, it just, it took hours and hours to sift through stuff to find these little pearls. But the preservation, the fact that the cans had been kept in my uncle's closet and on the floor, and even though we live in Arizona, it'd never been really too hot, so they were like preserved. It was amazing the quality that we were able to get. Even that river trip, that's in the 30s, and he took these big cameras and lugged them around and had, okay, I'm going to get in the boat now, so you get me going down. So it was getting all that footage was so amazing. Having it, I mean, just the fact that he was that prolific with making sure he had a camera around him. He was actually creating the documentary before I even knew I was going to do this.
And is all that stuff, I mean, have you archived it? Is it preserved now? And
it is. It's all digitized, and it's. I mean, if you saw, a lot of that film footage was archival and stuff we got from BBC and all the different archival organizations, but it's all preserved and digitized and immortalized, I guess. Exactly. He was the first to do the first color cover for Arizona Highways magazine, which was two little girls, and it was a beautiful picture in Navajo girls, and they were out in the snow and they were herding sheep. But his photographs were something of a hobby for him. He never really took them, never showed them. Nobody saw them. He'd even publish his own books just for him. I mean, like maybe make 10 copies of them and put his little pictures in it and write little captions. And it's an amazing thing to look at all of this. And he took it so seriously. He was very intense, and he was really good. And a couple of his books were forwarded by Ansel Adams, so he was taken seriously in his own little realm of the world that he was in, and that wasn't what he was doing for a living. It was just a hobby.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Sure.
I just forgot what I was going to say. I'm just really curious. He was never president, but is there any kind of Goldwater museum in Arizona or anywhere? He's so well-rounded they could show all sorts of things.
Yeah, there's a foundation at the ASU library, at the Arizona State University's library. It's called the Arizona Historical Foundation, and my grandfather's political papers and a lot of photography is housed there. And then some of his photography is at the University of Arizona in Tucson, at the Museum for Photography down there. There is discussions underway right now of a museum of Southwest Studies. It's called the Barry Goldwater Museum of Southwest Studies for the downtown Phoenix area. So there, it's kind of, building these big buildings is really expensive. And, everybody's just running for an office right now, so nobody's going to give you money for a building. So I think once the election is kind of done, maybe there might be a building. There might be something done that's for him. But he definitely deserves it. He's got a lot of stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. Yeah, I've got so much. He was into doing model airplanes when he retired, and that's what he did, because he was he was always into gadgets. And when he had 2 artificial hips and 2 artificial knees and 1 artificial shoulder. And so he basically was just, he had to sit around that big house and drive, all the housekeepers nuts because he had nothing to do, and he'd tinker, and he'd break something and then put it back together. So he would make all these model airplanes. So I have about 350 of these little things in boxes, and they're all, and you could tell the years that he was really still, he could paint really well. I mean, the fuselage looked really organized and all the right colors were on, and then later the fuselage was like, the color was something else, and he'd cram a little pilot down into the fuselage so that you'd shake it, you'd hear a little guy rattling. So I have I'm kind of nervous about showing the whole collection because it's going to be an evolution of his mind at that point. People are going to go, wow.
Well, that kind of raises another question, too, for the filmmakers in the audience. I mean, obviously one of the hardest parts about making a film is what you cut. I mean, you always have more, and it's always a matter of distilling it to its essence. So what isn't in the film that we should know about your grandfather that you had a hard time either cutting or had to leave out?
Lots. I mean, there's a whole, I really wanted to get into more of his relationship with the Native American people. He was a big advocate for the Native Americans. He helped establish the Salt River Project. He was very much of an environmentalist. He helped, establish some wonderful, incredible things that he did, like the Goldwater-Nichols Bill, which was the unification of the military, which he did. Sam Nunn helped him write. They wrote it together, and there's just so much about him that I kept wanting to put in this film, but it would have been 3 hours, and that would have been a Ken Burns, and I would have not gotten HBO to do it with me at all. I mean, they just wouldn't have wanted to watch Goldwater. When I went to them and said, this is a great idea, and Sheila and Evans, and she's like the big kahuna, and I'm telling her this idea because I'm so excited, and he's so wonderful, and she's like, what makes you think, we do 6 Feet Under, Sex in the City, what makes you think we want to do a movie on Barry Goldwater? I'm like, okay, I'll go back and find something really good. So it was a process for me to do this film.
Do you have another movie in the works?
I don't. This was an eye-opening experience for me to make a film, and not only do it, but I produced it and funded it and did 50% of everything with it. So I'm still kind of reeling on that. And you guys as filmmakers, you all know this. But I'm not used to that. Okay, I've always been in something that's, it's a process. This is so big. So I at this point, films, I'm not doing anything. But the book was something that I had released through Princeton University, and George Will wrote the foreword, and Bobby Kennedy Jr. wrote the afterword. So you get to actually see from these two perspectives of this man and how he kind of had that aisle crossing ability that was not as known until maybe now, hopefully. But yeah, it was a wonderful process, and I encourage anybody that has a family member to just document anything in their life. I mean, just start filming anything and talk to them.
Excuse me. I was wondering, after hearing your grandfather's comments about the religious right, what did he have strong? And excuse me, I know he was part Jewish, and that his mother was Episcopalian from the film. Did he make a choice as far as spiritual or religious preference, or maybe he agreed with the Hopi Indians?
He was very spiritual. I can't say that he subscribed to one particular. I mean, he was Episcopal by all sense of the word. But he built many churches, many different denomination churches and synagogues. He contributed a lot of land. He owned quite a bit of land where his house was, and gave chunks and parcels to different religious organizations. He felt that when he was out in nature, he was as close to God as he could ever be, and that was something that was God to him, is nature. So he just didn't, he wasn't somebody that was a Bible toter. He just was very spiritual, and that helped all of us have our own definitive ideas.
I saw where Barry Goldwater Jr. was endorsing Ron Paul for president, and I'm curious who you think your senior would have endorsed.
God, I don't know. I don't know. You know, I think it's who knows what he would do. I mean, I without a doubt, you never know. All I can say is that he could have definitely surprised everybody. I think we would have all just gone, what? Okay.
Oh, there's a question over there.
I was a child, more or less, during this era, and I'm not a very political person, but I came because of a magazine article I read a long time ago, and it was about your father, and it was about the family history. And to me, and I hope I'm getting it right, but it was like your father's grandfather basically was a Polish Jewish peddler who, I hope I'm right on this, helped the people in the gold rush to go to Alaska. Was that right?
He came from Poland. They came over with like the Levi Strauss, and they came through the San Francisco area, and they saw the kind of the flood that was going on and of the rush of people moving to San Francisco, and they just said, you know, let's go a little further out. Let's go out in the middle of the desert and just, you know, develop this little dry goods and do mercantile, which was what they were selling. They were selling, you know, sheets of fabric and flour and that kind of thing. So yes, they were in the retail business, mercantile.
Rush?
No, it was actually the San Francisco.
San Francisco, okay.
Yeah.
But it was like your father's grandfather's name was something like Big John or Big Jack.
Big Mike.
Big Mike, okay, and he was 6'5" or something. He was almost like
Right.
Paul Bunyan. And you think this guy was a Jewish immigrant, and his grandson is running for the presidency of the United States, and you go, wow, what a story.
I know. It's a very interesting story. Mm-hmm. The success that they were able to achieve in the West, and I mean, we're talking about farther, you know, in the middle of nowhere at that point where Arizona was. It was really nothing, and it was, you know, as he was saying, you know, he grew up in a territory that was just a very rustic experience. So that's probably where he got the appreciation for nature and life and value, and all that stuff was all part of his patriotism towards the United States, was just that he knew that his family had migrated and had such an opportunity. And Big Mike's wife's name was like Big Nose Sarah. I mean, These people, I mean, this is like when you watch Deadwood. You see it, you go, oh my God. I mean, we don't even talk to our families that way, but Big Mike and Big Nose Sarah, and anyway, but my grandfather would, yes. Big Mike. You know, I don't know if they would. Well, yes, he would go to Europe and shop and buy various goods. But my grandfather did the same thing. So I think when I look at the family dynamics, it was always the woman, the matriarchal figure that raised every single Goldwater family member. All those guys just bailed and did something else. Went to Washington, went to Europe, but, you know, and the women stayed home.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming over.
Good day. Thank you.